Uh, I will do the same thing as on Monday. I just provide some numbers, some things for discussion. Thank you very much for Navidor team just to present the very clear picture. Right now, I just recap it and then provide more some thoughts. But before I go to the detail, I go a little bit, I think, to talk about the roles of the states, the role of the state economic enterprises. The first one you look at here is the whole market. The majority of the competitive markets, there are no need the role of the states. However, there are market failures, such as the monopoly. So you have one role from here to Rangoon. It's some kind of monopoly. And the second one is externalities like education. The third one is the public goods like defense, security. The fourth one is the asymmetric information like finance. You put your money in the banks, but they yield for something else instead of keep your money. Or sometimes government official, they supposed to do things beneficial for the people, but in reality they do for some themselves instead of for the people. And the final one is irrational behavior. For example, the people just want the government to do everything for themselves. And then for this one, we need the role of the government for this one. So this is the functions or the roles of the state or government. There are two roles. The first one to correct market failures. The second one to improving equality. So to do this, there are three ways for the government to intervene. The first one, they just providing goods and services like defense, security, education, and something like that. The second one, they just use taxation or subsidy. For example, with the positive externalities like education or something like that, the government subsidize for private sector to provide services. With negative externality, the government use tax to prevent private sector to provide a lot of services, such as pollution or using cigarettes or other. The third one, the government can use regulation. When we talk about SEE, it belongs to this group. So we need the role of governments, but there are also government failures. The same situation happened with SEE. This is fundamental problems of state, or SEE we call principal agent problems. For example, the executive of the SEE supposed to generate benefit or profits for their companies. But in reality, sometimes they just seek for their benefits, corruption or something like that. So you all know this story, right? The story about senior mining enterprise official arrested for corruption in Myanmar. So I don't know, I think the reality, but if we look at the perception, the CPI is corruption perception index by the International Transparency. Myanmar, we see that there's corruption here. So that's why we need reform of the public sector and we need reform of the SEE. So for SEE, there are two problems. Because SEE, they have to do two things at the same time. The first one for business or for profit goal. And the second one for political or policy functions. But in reality, two functions, they are contradicting. For example, it's for business or for profit, a company just do business in Rangoon.
Sorry, can you say again?
I think if for profit purpose, a company just do in the cities. And but for the political or policy roles, they can do business in remote area. And then when the company gets lost, they plan for political function. So that's why I think a country should divide two functions separately. And there shouldn't a lot of SEE or SOEs in a country. So if we look at the situation of Myanmar, I think this chart is so that it is really complicated. You don't know where money comes from and where money goes. So it means that it's really untransparent. So this is the revenue and expenditure of the union government and the SEE. We see that for the SEE, its revenue about, it's here, it's about, just look at this year, 7%, and for the government, it's about 10%. And then if we look at expenditure for the SEE, just about a half of the union government. So in my presentation, you may forget everything, but try to remember this gap, this graph. Basically, the SEE account about a third of expenditure for the whole country. And for this picture, the team, I think, just show that it's similar to this one. So basically, the growth of the SOE about a half of the central government, a union government. And then if we look at here about for the tax and non-tax revenue, last I think on Monday we discussed about that. It is exactly only about 7% for the tax revenues and the rest is from the other sources. So for the whole state, our colleagues talk about that. In the case of Myanmar, that you should double this number, around 50% for the tax to the GDP, tax revenue, 15. Some country, some country they can reach 20% like Vietnam. So it means that the potential for the revenue in taxation of Myanmar, it really is a lot. And in this case, we look at the deficit. For SEE, it's small, but for the whole country, it's a lot.
So the SEE ရဲ့လိုငွေကတော့
And then this is the deficit financing. Mainly you borrow from domestic market. I'm not sure, but I guess that I think mainly borrow from banks or other financial institutions. It's more or less similar to Vietnam and other countries at this development state. And then this is the expenditure composition. This is the whole one. Just look at it, the revenue about 17%. And for the expenditure about 20%, it means the deficit more or less about 3%. In this case, we look at the role of SEE. In fact, it's really big. The revenue about 8.2% and expenditure about 8%. But there's one big problem for SEE that the capital investment here are really small. Because I think maybe the size of employees in SOE and SE or something like that is too large. So the cost for recurrent expenditure is too high. So maybe or other expenditure that I think generate the SEE. So it means that the roles of SEE contributing to the development of Myanmar is quite small. Or maybe the SEE just play the function of the government. They have a lot of employees to play the roles of the government. For that role, from experience from other countries, should I think transfer or should give back to the government instead of to put in the SEE. So for this graph and table, I would go back a little bit on Monday as we discussed that the expenditure for the education and health basically about 4% of GDP. So just you remember that on Monday we discussed about that the total government expenditure of Myanmar about 20% of GDP. If the central government assign this role for the local governments, the decentralization or fiscal decentralization become huge change. So if you add up some kind of social protection and other services right now belong to the central government, just assign to the local government, the fiscal decentralization could approach to 50% of 50% of the decentralization. It means the half spent by the local government. So right now we look at a little bit, I think capital spending here is about 5% of GDP. So just think about that in Myanmar, the total government expenditure about 20% of GDP. It means that capital expenditure just only about a quarter or a third. So in this case, I think if you expect the role of SEE should be capital spending should be higher, but in reality it's really low. And then right now we go to the SEE. You have, I think before you have about 44 SEE and then 12 of them converted into the administrative units. And 32% of them remain for SEE. But if we look at the expenditure composition of SEE, right, only 1% for capital expenditure and 7% for recurrent expenditure. So it means that a lot of function of the SEE should give back to the government. This is the really important point from my recommendation that Myanmar government can consider to reduce the role of the SEE. Right? Reduce it, I think, just give back the function of the government to the governments instead of the SEE. So in fact, if we look at the size of the SEE in comparison to the whole economy in Myanmar, it's really large because you have only 32 SEE, which account for about 7% of the revenue equivalent to 7% of the GDP. So if we look at other countries, they have hundreds and thousands of them, but the share of revenue, the revenue to GDP is just, I think, a little bit higher than Myanmar. So in this case, we can look at the flow of the funds between the union governments and the SEE. Just look at here, it's really complicated. And one again, I think with this graph, we don't know, I think, where money comes from and where money goes. So it creates intransparent. And then it creates a lot of problems with generating revenue and use them. And then, so if we look at here, so the gross profit and loss by sector, and gross profit and loss by driver. So in this case, only a few of them, natural resources, infrastructure, and financial. It's banks. So if we look at, I think here, this is the first that, this one is infrastructure, it is the natural resource, yeah. And then this one, the infrastructure. So it means that if we look at 32 SEE, in fact, it just concentrates a few companies on natural resources, infrastructure, and financial sectors. And in fact, in reality, for most of the sector, I think the role of the government should be limited. And if we look at this graph, I think the SEE generating loss in recent years or very low profit. And this is really important graph from your group. I think that it is the most important graph that the Naibidor group just generate. So it means the current expenditure of Ministry of Industry. Basically for the last 5 years, more than a half from SEE. From the last 5 years, the expenditure from SEE, the current expenditure of ministry is more than a half, more than 50%. So this graph is really important. So if you just basically transfer the role of SEE to the other account. So and then because this is the summary from the group, this is problem of SEE in Myanmar. A lot of lack, right? The SEE waste management, it lack of innovative, lack of creativity, lack of hard work, and a lot of lack of. It means that SEE in reality not in Myanmar, but around the world. They have no incentive or motivation to be productive or to be profitable. So that's why I think in the time going, Myanmar should consider, seriously consider to reform the SEE. So that's in this case, I would like to put some issue to discussion. So the first one, the central government should consider the roles of 32 SEE, try to separate the social or policy roles to the profitable role. It's really important. If two roles combine, there are a lot of problems happen. But there's one good thing in Myanmar that not facing the similar situation as China and Vietnam faced in the past. There are so many SEE belong to the local governments in Myanmar. There have been a loss in China and Vietnam. And then I think for those SEE belong to the local governments, they create more problems than benefits. So from my recommendation that Myanmar government, either the central government and local government, shouldn't create a lot of SEEs belong to the local governments. In this case, I think to reform SEE in Myanmar, you should consider two issues. The first one, transparency. It means that you should divide the roles of the SEE in two parts. The first one put the business goals on one side and put the social and policy roles in the other side. And you try to follow the international accounting system, especially for business activities. The second one, you can look at marketizations. Yeah, the marketization, it means you try to create competition amongst SEEs and with other companies. The second one is ownership, it means privatization. In this case, I think I can share the experience from Vietnam. We have done in the late 1990 that we divide the SOEs. In Vietnam, we call state-owned enterprises. And in here, you can SEE into certain groups. The first one is group the government or the state should keep it. The second one, the government should keep partly. And most of them just, I think, just sell to private. Or maybe just let them to do focus on profit activity. In the end, I think I just want to summarize that the role of SEE in Myanmar right now is really large. And experience from other countries that I think SOEs or SEE usually create a lot of problems. But I think from research and from experience from countries that the central governments, the government still keep and run the economy without relying on the SEE. So it means that the government still control the economy without having a lot of SEEs. So that's it. I stop my presentation here and go back to this graph. And we should discuss about it, how to reduce it, the SEE expenditure until maybe zero or close to zero, and increase the other expenditure for the government. So this is from my view from outside. So if I have some mistake or problem, please correct me. Yeah, you asked a lot, but this is the principles. It's really simple, just to deal with that issues. So if right now you look at 32 SEE, and you look at each units and SEE, it's quite simple. So if you cannot find any of their issues, no monopoly, no externalities, no public goods, no asymmetric information, or no irrational behavior, just let the market do it, right? Don't keep it. Just for SEE, you have the 20 units. You found out, I think, 10 units, none of them happens. None of them happens. And then just sell it, or just let the market do it. We call in that case it the competitive markets. I can give you very easy example. Just go ahead first. Yeah. So if you look at in the SEE units, that if none of them happens, monopoly, externalities, public goods, asymmetric information, and irrational behavior. If none of them happen, just sell it. It's really simple but powerful tool. I think that is we call economics 101, fundamental one, but apply for everywhere, especially for the government, yes, for the public sector. So that is why right now you go back, just use this one, and to decide. And one thing you may need to consider that because the role of the government is to improve equity. For example, you want to provide electricity for very remote community. Right. No private company want to do it. So that's why sometimes you need the roles of the government. But providing electricity in the city or water in the city, it can generate a lot of profits. In this case, you can let the private sector do with the government regulation. So that's I go to the second group. The group with market failures. So I think if these market failures happen, you still let the private sector to do it with government regulation. For example, you can let private company to set up the toll station on the road from here to Rangoon. But you set up the selling price Because if you let them freely to set a price, they would charge really high. For example, if you can allow the private sector to provide education, but because the education generating positive externalities, so the government can subsidize that. So in the case of asymmetry information like banks, the government still let the market to do it with the government regulations. In this case, when you mentioned about public-private partnership, or in Vietnam we don't call privatization, but we call equitization. So it means it just sell partially to the market for the private house. So in this case, it depends on the type of companies. The government still keep higher than 50%. And some companies, the government can keep less than 50%. So in this case, I think if we look at the 32 SEE in Myanmar, you can find a lot of approaches. That's very reasonable, very helpful for Myanmar. Okay, next questions. If you want to elaborate anything. Next question, please. Other tables. You have to ask, you have to discussion. This is my role here. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's your turn now. So, to be honest, I think when I received the file from the RI, Renaissance Institute, we look at every graph, every number, every page. And we try to find a lot of interesting things. There are another graphs in that paper that you see, if you remember that graph with 80% of the expenditure by SEE and 20% is spent contribute to the government or something like that. That kind of graphs is really important. So it means that the size of the SEE in Myanmar is really large, but the contribution to the economy is basically it's very small. So that's related to your point, right? So because I think if we look at the expenditure or something like that, or revenue of SEE, but yes, they are really large. But the contribution to the budget, to the expenditure or something like that is low. In this case, I think if you try to reform some kind of type of taxation, because the roles of SEE here is large, so maybe it should be difficult for Myanmar to pursue some kind of reform. So like in the mornings, my colleagues said that the tax base should be large. So but the tax base should enhance a few companies, right? When they have to pay a lot. It means that if the new tax they pay a lot, they try to put it away. So when you stop it, it means it's wrong, right? It's wrong, the mistake should belong somebody. So if you continue and then just because it's continue and then the responsibility belong to maybe nobody. So that's why I think it is really rare case. But if we look at the cost and benefit analysis, it should be like that. It shouldn't be in the real world. We observe a lot, right? Because a lot of choices already spend a lot of money. But we know exactly we spend $1 more. We receive less than $1. But it still keeps spending. Just because nobody wants to take the responsibilities. So but I think in this case, if you try to create some kind of transparency or something like that, a good practice of decision-making process, I think such situation could happen more, right? Because you know that exactly, if we continue, we will lose money. We should stop it now instead of continue to build it. So it means I think if you can sense they can do some kind of action. So it means good thing there should be good thing there. That somebody want to take the responsibility. So if you are tired now, but I want you to remember a few numbers. This one should compare the roles of the central governments, the local governments, and the SEE. On Monday, I gave you number that the total expenditure of Myanmar is about 20% of GDP. In this case, over 6% by the SEE and 40% by the government. This here is 6% by the SEE, the expenditure. This is the expenditure. It is 14% by the government. Do you remember what is the percentage of the local government? Who can answer this question? If none of you can answer that, we will be here until midnight.
ဆိုတော့ဘယ်သူမှမဖြစ်နိုင်ဘူးဆိုတော့ကျွန်တော်တို့ဒါညတစ်ကောင်ထိဒီမှာပဲနေရမှာပါတဲ့ဘယ်သူမှမိပါ
Who remember? If 14%, how much spent by the local government? You have to raise your hands and answer this question. I saw the number on Monday. Can you answer?
ဖြေနိုင်ကြပါသ
Who
လား
can answer?
ဘယ်သူဖြေနိုင်မှာလဲ
The expenditure of the local government to GDP. So it means that in this case the government spend about 14% of GDP. How much the local government? Any of you remember? I just want you remember this number. Only 2%. Do you remember that number I mentioned frequently on Monday? Just think about that. 20%. So it means that the roles of the SEE about 3 times of the local government, and the roles of the central government about 6 times of the local government. In other countries, just say like this, I think about 50% for the central and local. So that's why in this case you need to reform the SEE and to decentralize more. So that's why this class is really important. Okay, finally, just remember for me 20%, 6%, 40%, and 2%.
So
20, 14, 6, and 2. It's good, right? It's a good number to remember forever. Yes, okay, thank you very much.